Hello and welcome to His Author's Voice, and I am the author Jack Sanger. They do say that events in life are often stranger than those in fiction. Well, the following story, I suppose, combines both life and fiction. I'll tell you what precipitated it after you've heard it. I hope you enjoy it. The Wasps Nest. He walked slowly along the edge of the River Wear, the great sandstone monument to a Christian god, Durham Cathedral, framed behind him, the water a perfect mirror of a hot blue sky, and the summer foliage partly concealing townhouses along the far banks. Being a musician, a jazz pianist at that, an internal churn of variations on Dylan's Blowing in the Wind was occupying his thoughts. It was augmented pleasingly by electric flashes of colour from a host of dragonflies zigzagging across the water's surface. It was a relief to get away from the thick polluted air of the city centre. Here the scent was of composting leaves heavily laced with intermittent floral notes. He found himself a suitable mound on the grassy bank and sat down, taking out his blue cheese Stilton slab from its grease-proof paper and a pear. He'd just settled in his mind a piano-saxophone counterpoint when the first wasp bit into his exposed ankle. In quick succession there were sharp, painful stings on his wrists and neck. He leapt up, flailing his hands, slapping himself, yelling imprecations. But there was now a cloud of buzzing adversaries around him, acting as though they were operating from a central intelligence. He started running, and here a strange transformation took place. His long hair and beard were no longer separate entities, for his pale skin was sprouting the same ginger hair everywhere. His clothes had vanished. Instead of the rhythmic stride of a modern man, his gait had become awkward, shambling. His arms were longer, hands swinging past his knees. His soul-hardened feet in their upper covering of spiky fur were slapping the earthen path. He was running backwards towards where the cathedral had been, but now there were no buildings anywhere. The wasps were reluctantly letting him go, apart from those riding in his body hair, which he tried to beat to death. Then ahead he saw his family gathered under the mother tree, the source of all life and protection for his kind. He threw himself under its shade, among them, grunting, still in pain. As one they combed him with their fingers, finding and killing the last of the flying assassins. As they calmed him down with their sure-fingered massage, time vortexed again. Instead of the tree shading him, he was lying inside a dark, shadowy edifice of great sandstone blocks. 2 walls of side pillars held an overhanging slab. A woman lay beside him. Much of the hair had gone from his body. Instead, animal skins partially covered him. She was similarly dressed. In her long hair she'd entwined blossom. Pretty shells were linked by a leather thread around her waist. She was picking out the carapaces of dead wasps and throwing them outside. She was humming a repeated tune of calming notes. The song called up the protective spirits among them, the spirits of the sun and the stars, the stones, the river and the forests. He stared trustingly, forlornly into her large, dilated, dark eyes, and she bent to press her nose against his when the vortex happened again. After a swift plunge into a deep sadness as he left her behind, he emerged into a familiar realization. He was inside Durham Cathedral, lying beside several others. They were arranged in a line on a long trestled table in front of the altar. He was suffering as though of plague, but knowing it was in truth the rash of hundreds of wasp stings. Around them, great sandstone pillars reared to the vaulted ceiling. The sun lit up the scenes in the coloured glass of the windows. He thought that the inside of the cathedral was like a reproduction of a forest, with the trunks of great trees holding up the sky and the sun picking out flowers to illuminate within their dark foliage. Some wasps were making their way down the aisle and were being swatted away from the recumbent figures on the table. The tune that his woman had hummed inside the dolmen was now amplified and exaggerated by monks in the rising and falling plain-song chorus of Latin. The bishop walked along the line of the prostrate, sick and wounded, swinging a thurible over them and asking for God's healing mercy. As the incense drenched him, he felt a scorching, as though the bites were being further inflamed. Then nuns came, carrying sacred wine, which they used to wet his lips. They followed it with a thin bread wafer pressed into his mouth. Novices followed with scented oil, which they rubbed into his skin. He became quite ecstatic lying there, the overpowering scent of rose essence, the droning monk's chorus like that of a myriad bees, the colourful fall of light across his eyes. The next sudden twist in time found him oxygen-suited and suspended on an upthrust jet. There was no vegetation. What once had been a river was a dry gouge in the land. Where a great building had stood were piles of ancient rubble. A doorway still stood, arched, weirdly intact, looking for all the world like an ancient dolmen. Not too far distant was the glittering spear of his landing craft. A sand wasp, much tinier than those of the past, but yellow and black striped, attacked his visor. He smiled, but refrained from batting it away. He knew the rules. He felt an imperceptible nostalgia looking around him, for he knew all the phases this land must have gone through. Now it would take thousands of years of dormancy before once again recycling through its phases. A voice came through his headgear. "You okay?" "Yeah." "What's it like out there? You see anything familiar?" "No, not really." "Shame. Experience of previous lives is hard to recover fully without good evidence. Reincarnation is something we know is a definite fact, but actualizing it, even on a very pricey holiday like this, well, that's something else again." "I know I've been here before. I checked all the coordinates dozens of times. It's so tantalizing." "It's certainly that." They had just uttered these words when he woke to find himself in the University Hospital of North Durham, his eyes open to a scene of high-tech equipment, nurses in theatre, PPI, and a surgeon in white garb, fully masked. "Ow," he said softly, feeling both a full body itch and a certain amount of pain. "Ow, indeed," said the doctor, reaching forward and taking his hand in hers. 1,053 ows, to be exact. "What?" He struggled with her words. "Stings. They found you by the weir, lying on a wasp's nest, for God's sake." "What was that? Attempted suicide by wasps?" "I looked it up, but there's no word for it." "Let's just call it insecticide, yes?" And she convulsed with laughter at the pun. He tried to smile through his puffed lips, but he had no idea what she was talking about. Everything before this moment was completely blank. "Anyway, you were in a coma for days with the anaphylactic shock. Quite a trauma. Your heart was beating incredibly slowly. All systems were just short of shutdown. A miracle you came through it. You should thank whatever God you believe in. He, she, or it was certainly looking after you. Brain now normal. Organs chugging away. Swelling going down. But you're going to have to carry a supersized antihistamine hypodermic with you forever, okay? He nodded, barely comprehending what she was saying. Then he slipped back into half sleep. A few days later, on a recovery ward, he woke from dozing to find his friend, the saxophonist in the band, sitting by his bed, looking anxiously at his still bright red skin. They chatted a while before his friend eventually asked, "You get very far with the arrangement of Blowing in the Wind?" A bubbling awakening began to fizz through his body as his mind replayed the opening lyrics of the song. How many roads must a man walk down? And he was suddenly cast back to a shambling, fearful escape from a swarm of wasps, along a beaten dirt path beside the River Wear. And so much more. He grasped his friend's wrist. "Christ," he muttered, "you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you now." Well, there we have the Wasps Nest. I said at the beginning that I'd give an explanation of how I came to write this tale. Well, it's in memory to a very dear friend, Roger Lee, who died at only 50 years old, 30 years ago. A jazz pianist and a flautist. He told me the first phase of this tale. I embroidered the rest. I hope he finds it to his liking. In the meantime, perhaps you will look around the channel and listen to more of these stories. They all last about 15 minutes, and they all have something of a twist at their ending. Please subscribe and pass the link on to your friends. In the meantime, if you prefer to read, then you can go to my website, www.jacksanger.com, and there you'll find novels, plays and short stories to download for free, or you can make a donation if you prefer. So that's it. Remember, subscribe. That's all for now. Go in peace. Bye-bye.